A little bit of a change in the agenda. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with the Department of Administration. And with that, we're going to ask Mr. Wu to come forward and give us his overview of the agency budget.
Good morning, committee. Stephen Wu, Senior Fiscal Analyst with the Legislative Research Department. Before I get started, I want to recognize we have a number of folks in the audience today. We have the Secretary of Administration, D'Angela Burns-Wallace, with us. We also have the Director of Financial Management for D of A, Celeste Cheney-Tucker. I also see that Director Adam Proffitt is with us in the audience, as well as Jim McMurray from KDFA. So there is a wealth of resources here that would be able to help provide some answers to the committee's questions. So just as a brief overview for the Department of Administration, the agency's primary function is to provide central service for various state agencies. So as a result, there are a number of programs within this department, and they perform a wide variety of services. I'm going to jump straight into the fiscal year 2022 analysis. That will begin on page 7. So this section just gives you a line-by-line change of what has happened to the agency's budget from the Legislature's approval of it last session. And you can see line by line with the numbered list what those changes are. So for fiscal year 22, the agency requests about $216.9 million in on-budget expenditures. About $155.4 million of this comes from SGF. About $36.1 million of this comes from the Expanded Lottery Act Revenues Fund, ELARF. About $21.3 million of this comes from transfers from the State Highway Fund. This is a bit lower than what the legislature approved last year, about a decrease of about $4.6 million. And that decrease is primarily due to item 2 in that list. If you go to the bottom of, my apologies, item 3. If you go down to the bottom of page 7, you'll see the description for item 3. It's a decrease for the Capers pension obligation bonds that the legislature issued last year. So if you'll recall, last year the legislature authorized KDFA to issue up to $500 million in revenue bonds for Capers. The bill that was passed capped the interest rate at 4.3%. So accordingly, when we were working on the budget determining the debt service amount, the debt service was keyed to that 4.3%. Those bonds came in a bit lower than that. The interest rate ultimately was, I believe, 2.7%. And accordingly, the debt service payments for that came out to be about $24.2 million for on an annual basis for 22. So this is a bit lower than what the legislature approved. The legislature appropriated $28.8 million SGF for debt service at that higher interest rate at the cap. And so with the interest rate coming in lower, debt service is lower. So the difference is lapsed back to the state general fund. There's also some decreases for employer contributions because of savings from these Capers bonds. That's detailed in item number 4. For 22, I want to jump to the governor's recommendation because there are a number of changes here. They begin with items 6 through 9. I believe they are start on page 8 and go to 9. So the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends about $1 billion in expenditures. It's billion with a B. That includes about $947.8 million from SGF, about $36.1 million from ELARF, and about $21.3 million in transfers from the Highway Fund. I'm just going to go by all the governor's changes line by line since they are pretty significant. The first is item number 6, the resident tax rebate. The governor adds about exactly $460 million for a one-time $250 resident tax rebate for eligible Kansans. All Kansas residents who filed 2020 tax return are eligible for this rebate. The Office of the Governor indicates that this would cover about 1.2 million taxpayers. And it's included within the Department of Administration's budget purely as the Department of Administration is a vehicle for the distribution of these per the governor's recommendation. The other major changes are items 7 and 8. I believe this committee is pretty familiar with these items already. The governor adds in total about $332.2 million to pay off 2 bonds early. This includes about $160.5 million for Series 2015A bonds. These are a bundle of bonds that include some refinance bonds, some refunded bonds, debt service for John Redmond Reservoir, and debt service for a KU Medical Education Building. The scheduled payoff for these bonds would otherwise occur in about 2035. The paying off these early includes the debt service principal amount for the next year, 23, as well as the remaining balance of about 132.7 million. The call date for this is the next call date for this coming up is May 1st, and the second series of bonds included within this is item number 8, and that is about 171.8 million for Series 2015 G bonds. These are bonds for debt service related to the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility in Manhattan, MBAF. Similar to with the 2015 A bonds, this would pay off the debt service for the next year, debt service principal for the next year, as well as the remaining balance of about 154.3 million. The other item included within the governor's recommendation for 22 is the addition of $200,000 and 5 FTE positions for the Office of Public Advocates. This is related to 2 executive orders. The first is Executive Order 2127, which created the Office of the Public Advocates. This executive order folds in 3 entities into this new office. The Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, that was already in the Department of Administration's budget organization. The Care Ombudsman, which was transferred from KDADS, and the Division of the Child Advocate, which is created by Executive Order 2128. The expenditures included within the governor's recommendation for this item are for the Division of the Child Advocate expenses, since the Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman is already in the agency's budget, and since the Care Ombudsman is in the KDAD's budget for 22, the only additional expenses needed are for the Division of the Child Advocate, which is what is reflected here. Now, at this point, I would be happy to answer any questions on 22 before jumping into 23.
Committee questions on 22? Seeing none, go ahead, proceed.
For 23, you'll see that beginning on page 11. Again, line by line. The agency requests about 215.1 million in on-budget expenditures for 23. About 159 million of this comes from SGF, about 36.1 million of this comes from ELARF, and about 15.9 million of this comes from transfers from the State Highway Fund. This is a bit lower than what the agency requested in 22, about 1.9 million lower. The most significant change in this is for item number 2, some changes in debt service expenditures. There's an increase in SGF spends and a decrease in spends from all other funds. And this is due to some fluctuations in payments to various bonds. You'll see those detailed out on the page there. Like there's some decreases for bonds related to the State House, some increases for bonds, those 2015 A bonds, some decreases for those 2015 G bonds, MBAF, and some decreases for some bonds that were issued in the past couple of years. Now, for this year, I also want to jump down to the governor's recommendations since there are some pretty big changes here as well. It begins with item number 4. The governor for fiscal year 23 recommends about 290.6 million in on-budget expenditures. 250.4 million of this comes from SGF, 36.1 million of this comes from ELARF, and none of this comes, there are no transfers from the State Highway Fund in the governor's recommendation for 23. So the major items of change are first, item number 4, the governor adds about 120 million to pay off the docking renovation and KDHE lab. If you recall, the legislature last year authorized the issuance of up to 120 million in bonding authority to renovate the docking state office building as well as to construct a KDHE lab. The Joint Committee on State Building Construction, as well as the State Finance Council, approved the renovation of docking to a 3-story building. This amount would be to pay the entire cost of this upfront instead of going through bonding and paying this off over a duration of years. So the overall amount is the same as what the legislature estimated last year. The only difference is the duration of time this is paid off. The governor's recommendation would just pay this off upfront. The next item is item 5. The governor cuts about 15.9 million in transfers from the State Highway Fund and replaces that with additional SGF. And this would end extraordinary transfers from KDOT to the Department of Administration. That 15.9 million is just used, it was originally used for debt service payments. So as a result now, the SGF spends for those debt service payments would go up while the transfers from state highway funds would disappear. Items 6 and 7 are a deletion of about 45.2 million in total for the bond payoffs we discussed for fiscal year 22. So that's that 215A bond and that 215G bond. Paying off those early means you wouldn't make debt service payments in 23. So accordingly, there's a decrease in 23. And lastly, there's item number 8 is the additional expenditures for the Office of the Public Advocate. The governor adds about 724,000 and 8 FTE positions for this office. This includes expenditures for the CanCare Ombudsman, the Division of the Child Advocate, and the Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, which expenditures are already within this agency's budget. Now, at this point, I know I've gone through a lot in a pretty short amount of time. I would be happy to answer questions on 23, or if the committee had questions on anything else up to this point.
Committee, questions on 23 and/or any other segment of the budget? Senator Hawk.
I just have one quick one, and the agency may answer. So the KDHE lab doesn't show as administration expense, but docking does. So I assume the lab, I think I asked this question yesterday, is going to be in KDHE budget?
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we got both of those. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll have the agency come forward.
One last comment before turning it over. If you turn to the last couple of pages at the end of the document, you'll see a section on page 39 for debt service. This will aggregate the principal and interest payments for all the bonds within this agency. The Department of Administration pays for the bond debt service on a number of items. You'll see a quick summary of that on page 39. And additionally, on page 41, you'll see an overview of the various capital improvements. Aside from the debt service payments, aside from debt service payments and the docking item in the governor's recommendation, the only item included that you haven't heard yet there is in the capital improvement budget is our expenditures for the renovation, for the rehab and repair of the Capitol complex. So this is the usual year-to-year repair expenses. So unless there are questions on those, I'll turn it over to the.
One question, another question, Senator Hawk.
And I think my question is probably for KDFA at whatever the appropriate time is, and in terms of the rationale for picking these particular bonds for payoff. Yeah, I'd just be interested, and probably as kind of a review for me. We had this in joint budget committee, and I thought we got a good explanation, but could you refresh me why these were picked as opposed to some others?
Yeah, the shortest answer is that KDFA determined that those two bonds would be, paying off those two would have an economic benefit to the state, whereas, so the legislature last year asked for, not last year, over the interim, requested for a list of bonds that could be paid off early for economic benefit. Those were the two that KDFA identified. Can't really speak to how they got to that point, that conclusion. I would defer that answer to Jim or KDFA, but those were identified by KDFA to be able to be paid off early for economic benefit.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, seeing none others, thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, come forward, state your name, and have some questions.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Secretary D'Angela Burns-Wallace, Secretary of Administration. Thank you all for having me this morning and hearing our budget. As you can see, and as was presented, the Department of Administration, we are a service agency. We are the backbone to make sure that all the services are delivered and helping agencies then deliver their services to Kansans. So what you see of our budget is a lot of the administrative, the backroom movement of what we pay for, what we have to handle on behalf of the government, the things that, that must be done to keep the lights on. What I do want to stress is that, over these last few years, the Department of Administration prides itself on delivering excellent customer service and being consistent and quality service to the agencies and to everyone that we are serving. And during this period of time, as you can imagine with the pandemic, we have had to ramp up certain aspects of what we do to ensure that we are providing services to help the agencies during kind of these times where everyone was, changing, trying to be agile, being flexible. And the one thing, there are two of the units that I really want to point out, because if you think about, throughout this entire time, we kept our state office buildings in this complex clean, ready to go, lights on, making sure that people could get in and out of them. And even at times where we had to ramp things up and provide, certain protections and mitigations, our Office of Facility and Property Management, those people that you see, wiping down the rails and cleaning throughout the State House and throughout the complex, they have been here day one in the buildings, making sure that we are creating safe and comfortable spaces as our staffs and the legislators move throughout. And that has been consistently delivered. And they have even flexed and been agile in how they delivered things. Likewise, our Office of Mail, Surplus, and Printing have really had to kind of lean in different ways throughout this period of time, responding to various needs of agencies, doing things differently. And what I point both of these out because the one thing about the Department of Administration is what we try to do is understand the needs of the agencies and really figure out how do we marshal and move those resources to meet whatever those needs are. And in these last 2 years, I am very proud of the work that has come out of this agency to ensure that we're able to address those needs as the various departments across the state have needed them. But we haven't just maintained, we've also continued to push. So for instance, we launched a statewide learning management and talent management system for all state employees so that they have full-on access to additional trainings at their fingertips, that we are able to have an electronic database of annual reviews and position descriptions and things of that nature for protection and for resources for all of our state employees. So our overall budget, as you can see, if you look at it, it is fairly flat. Like we kind of move along in a very consistent way. The enhancements that are in our budget as have been identified are really the differences that you see this year that have already been outlined by KLRD. So the introduction of the Office of Public Advocate, and understand in the way that that office is constructed, it works very much like the Office of, the Office of Budget works in the Department of Administration. It's a kind of a standalone entity that just has an administrative house in the Department of Administration, but that means its FTEs and its budget sits on our overall submitted budget. Likewise, you'll see, as has already been talked about, the tax rebate payments as well as the bond debt. We are the administrators. We're the ones who pay those bills. So when you look across the budget as to where it would sit in the state, it sits with us. And so those large dollar amounts that you see this budget kind of flex to do, it's because it hits our budget and then we process the payments right out the door if all of those items are approved. Same with the Docking State Office Building. Docking is sitting on administration. The KDHE lab is put into their budget. And again, as was mentioned during the original budget presentation, the intent here, while the entire amount currently is put into the budget that matches onto the bonds, we are pursuing the federal dollars. And before we get to the end of the season, we'll be able to give a much clearer, enough confirmed federal dollar amount, which we believe will be at least up to 50%, that we can then use federal funds for, and then we'll work with the Division of Budget to put in a GBA to bring this actual cash amount down to match on what is needed for cash. So we don't anticipate that the entire 120 will stay in here once we have that federal, the confirmation of allowability and the exact dollar amount. The last thing I would say is I just want to mention just briefly around our performance-based measures are, and so when you look at our measures, because of what we do, a lot of ours are output, right? We react to what the agency's needs are. So it's maintaining service, it's response times, it's number of pieces processed to match on to the needs. But we also, you'll see sprinkled in there, we ask and we look for satisfaction of agencies, efficiency of how we're delivering, trying to ensure year over year that certain things are coming down or they're not repeated at a higher level if there's incidents, if there's issues that we are seeing. And so that, just want to mention that sometimes our metrics might look that in that performance-based budget may look a little different than some of the other agencies. And I just point to the fact that being a service agency, we do, a lot of our metrics tend on being able to match the needs and the demands of the other agencies. And so that's what you see reflective there. So with that, I welcome questions.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. Questions from the committee? I do have a question in particular to the Department of Labor. We'll step aside on who was responsible or irresponsible for the technology issues that occurred there. My concern with that agency was and is that the personnel were not available to the claimants to simply bring their paperwork in and hand it to somebody. It was very, very frustrating. You would not believe the number of emails, calls, and messages I got and everybody else got because people simply couldn't come even from a 50-mile radius to hand in their paperwork. I don't think anybody was in the Department of Labor building. I don't understand why the top dozen persons couldn't be in there, or any other agency space that you were under supervision of, with a lot of people working from home. We could have had shielded boxes and people could have stayed in there, but accepted paperwork, accepted comments, accepted conversation. We let a lot of Kansans down. It was extremely frustrating, the amount of calls and concern that created. I just, again, aside from the technology, who's to blame for that? Operationally, I think it was very, very poorly handled. And I'm just disappointed, very disappointed in that. So anything else? Would you like to respond? Would you like to help me understand why it happened the way it happened?
So I actually would defer to my colleagues in the Secretary of Labor. I do not want to speak directly. That is not directly under my purview. So while we service and support agencies, each secretary has responsibility for the operations of their offices. So I don't want to step into their space accordingly.
You talked about backstopping the agencies. You work with them on space, you work with them on operations and so forth. So if you didn't have some involvement, you should have had some involvement.
I had involvement, but as I said, I would defer any of those questions to that agency only because I do not want to misstep into their space, as I would ask no other secretary to step into mine.
We'll pursue it again at a later date or another time. Again, it's just I need to express my frustration for the Kansans that were trapped and caught in that dilemma. So, Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too have some frustration with that, but my frustration goes a little bit in a different direction. I was talking to the Board of Regents, and during that time, the Board of Regents offered their facilities and their people. They were getting paid. They didn't have students involved during the first phase of this. They didn't have students on campus. They offered their community, their buildings, their staff to do exactly, have a door open so they could take the documents and transfer them back to you, or not to you, to the Department of Labor, excuse me. I didn't understand why that offer was not accepted. So that question probably needs to be answered by Department of Labor, but could you transfer that question to the Department of Labor?
We will ensure
that
that we
back to
do.
us?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Hawk?
Not to belabor those last two questions, but I want to go back to the bonds. On your testimony, Madam Secretary, you list the 2015A and the 2015G, and then on your final page, you're showing what's going to be paid off. And I don't understand all the bonding process, but are all of the bonds that we have left in the 2015A series being paid off, or are there just some of those being paid off?
I think it is all of them, but I will do, is it all of them? It is all in that series.
So, and just a picky question. So you kind of indicate the 230 million. I'm guessing that was what the total was, but what's left to pay off is just 160.5 million. Is that, am I reading that right?
No, I think the total payoff is 330, well, oh, I'm sorry, for just 215 or?
The 215.
The 215s, I believe the total payoff that we will be issuing is 332 between the two of them.
Your FY '22 is just what we're paying off in '22.
Because when we pay it off, it'll hit 22 and we'll pay it completely off. And then what you see across the budget is actually in 23, you see a reduction because the amount that was supposed to be paid for the annual for those is now reduced from the 23 budget. Does that help?
Yes, and then just to clarify that $81 million savings, is that just a savings in FY '22?
That's basically the lifetime savings of now that we have paid it off. If we hadn't have paid it off, that would have been the additional cost. It would have cost the state to run out the entire life of the bond. So the 81 is kind of like our overall total savings by paying them off early.
Great. Just a comment, Mr. Chair. I think paying off debt when we have the ability to do it is really a good idea. I try to live my personal life that way. I wished I was better at it, but I think it's a smart thing to do, and I appreciate having this information. And again, from what we heard in Joint Budget Committee, picking the right ones that give us the best return for our budget and are timely and appropriate to be paid off. I appreciate the work that was done on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. One other quick question, Madam Secretary. If you'd give us a quick update on the docking building and the KDHE, the Joint Building Committee did hand that off. And tell us what the status is and a little bit of the time frame as best you can.
Yes, and we actually, it did not come up on the agenda for Ways and Means, but we did go to approps about 2 weeks ago, and we have a one-pager that actually lays out both documents, both projects, and it shows the phases that they're in and the total projected timeline. I'll make sure that my team gets that over to you all and to the full committee. What we're in the stage right now, so for docking, we're in the stage where there's the background work that needs to be done and basically a set of bridging documents, which allows us to get to the point to be able to put the RFP out for the full construction management to be billed. So we're doing bridging documents. There's background preparation, as you can imagine. We've already had various teams out where they, take various specs to be able to prepare those documents, because before the construction bid can go out, there's a whole set of things that we have to provide to them. These type of projects by statute have various steps and various committees that lean in at various points of this. We have that all laid out. I will provide that. But for KDHE Lab, they're in a similar state. They're preparing their first set of documents, which include looking at the land. Again, they're not quite bridging documents. They'll be a little bit different because it's a new build and because we'll be using a different construction method for that particular project. The construction method for docking was specified in the proviso, and so they'll be moving a little bit differently, but you'll see it when it's laid out in that one pager. Apologize, we don't have those today, but I will make sure you have them by tomorrow.
Get me that, because when I report this out to the full committee, I'm sure they'll be asking those types of questions.
We will make sure you have them for that.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for the Secretary? Okay, Thanks for being here today,
Thank you.
very much. Any other questions? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the debt service page that you have here, if I may ask you one question here, is this all of our bonding indebtedness?
This
That
should,
was on this packet here that,
this should be all that the Department of Administration holds. So on the page, where you see like the bond descriptions, and then it has some capers, and then various other non-reportable, that's the page you're looking at, correct, sir?
yes.
Yep. I'm going to ask Jim from KDFA to come, just so that he can give that clarification. But I know, my understanding is this is all that we hold at Department of Administration. There are a few various others that other agencies hold as well, but I'll turn it over to Jim.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Jim McMurray from the Kansas Development Finance Authority. The Secretary's characterization of the data she presented is correct. That's for the Department of Administration. If you're looking for a broader summary of debt that the state has, we do publish annually the Kansas debt study. You can also look at the state's annual comprehensive financial report under the long-term obligations section that lists out all the debt. And there's also information in the comparison report prepared by the Division of Budget each year. But I have copies of this for the committee I can share with you, and it's available on our website. It's transmitted to leadership at the beginning of each session.
Thank you very
Questions?
much. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Hawk would like his hot hands on that. Okay, committee. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Committee, what's the thinking on this budget? Any proposals? Senator Hawk?
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the budgets for 22 and 23 for Department of Administration as presented.
It's been moved and seconded by Senator Clays to pass this. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Thank you for attending today. Department of Administration will now move on to the Office of Information and Technology Services. And with that, we'll have Mr. James Fisher give us an overview of the budget. Good morning, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman Solentraub, members of the committee. As the chairman stated, my name is James Fisher. I'm the managing IT analyst with KLRD, and today I'm going to present to you the budget for the Office of Information Technology Services. In the prior presentation, we still have Secretary D'Angela Burns-Wallace, who serves as the Secretary of Administration and also the Executive Chief Information Officer. With her today is also Brian Ryder, the Director of Financial Services for OITS. So we're going to go ahead and jump ahead a little bit on the document here. Well, first of all, the first few pages are an overview of the agency. And for those of you that are not familiar with OITS, its primary function is to provide data and communication services to other state agencies. They serve about 450 offices with 17,000 data communication users and 10,000 phone users. This budget includes both on and off budget expenditures. The on-budget expenditures are primarily used for statewide IT infrastructure and networking equipment or substantial upgrades and rehabilitation of that equipment, and those are mostly paid for with state general fund dollars. The off-budget expenditures are primarily for services rendered for other state agencies on behalf by OITS. So state agencies are paying OITS for the services that they offer. And we make this distinction to help avoid double counting of those funds because those expenditures would be factored into the budgets of the other state agencies you're hearing. So jumping forward here, we're going to actually start with the FY 2022 analysis, and that would be on page 10 of the draft document. You'll see that familiar table that Stephen referenced here. So in FY 2022, the agency's revised request is $4.3 million in on-budget expenditures, most of which is SGF. So all of but $43,000 is SGF for that. That remaining 43 is from a GIS contracting fund that they use. So this is the same as the FY 2022 approved amount. These funds would again be used for the rehabilitation and repair of networking equipment that's at the end of its planned life cycle. It's like an R&R fund for that type of equipment. The governor did concur with this agency's on-budget request, but you'll notice for FY 2022, the request also includes $51.5 million in off-budget expenditures as well. And primarily that table is actually looking at that since that's the majority of the agency's budget. So that is a 0.8% or about $400,000 increase from the approved budget amount. So this is primarily driven by shifts in utilization of the agency's IT services. Some of the more notable items on here would be item 3, which shows a $720,000 increase for additional utilization of the Unisys data center or the data center as a services offering and increased costs for operating the state's mainframe. Item 4 shows a $700,000 increase for the agency's direct build services program, which is attributed to additional usage of the desktop as a service offering, and also a change in how the agency recorded certain expenditures on Microsoft licenses that weren't associated with the Office 365 agreement. Item 5 shows a $365 increase for the implementation of certain IT projects within OITS. These would be for an Aptio module for Bill of IT services and for a ServiceNow upgrade. Aptio is a financial and operational data platform that the organization uses, and ServiceNow is kind of like an incident management software that kind of helps them troubleshoot and track any kind of technology issues that state agencies might have. Item 8, we'll start getting into some of the decreases that offset some of those increases that were just discussed, is a $1.1 million decrease due to the cancellation of an IT security project. And item 9 shows a $301,000 decrease due to the elimination of rent as the state agency exits the Landon State Office Building data center because they've migrated most of that over to the Unisys data system. This revised request also includes 115 FTE, which are all paid for with off-budget funds, which is an increase of 1.8 FTE above the revised request, above the approved figure, I apologize. And my understanding is this is due to the agency converting some part-time temporary staff to full-time staff. The governor did concur with the agency's off-budget request. That total request would be for $55.8 million. That's the off and on-budget request combined. Would the chair like me to take questions on FY 2022 or move on to 2023?
Committee, questions on 22? If none, proceed to 23. Thank you.
Will do. We're going to jump ahead a few pages to page 14. The agency's request for FY 2023 is again $4.3 million in on-budget expenditures, most of which is from SGF, except for $43,000 from a GIS contracting fee fund. So again, same as the FY 2022 revised request. And those $4.3 million again would be for that R&R fund for network technology. The governor did concur with the agency's on-budget request. The revised request for FY 23 also includes $51.5 million in off-budget expenditures, and this is a 0.1% decrease, or about $80,000 from the FY 2022 revised request. Some of the more notable items in that particular one would be item number 1, which is an $800,000 increase for the renewal of a 3-year software license for IT security offered by the vendor Splunk. This was last renewed in FY 2020, and then you'll start seeing some notable decreases in item 4, which has a $415,000 getting a little off my numbers. Those are low. $415,000 decrease for the purchase of IT equipment for other state agencies. My understanding is they've kind of ramp up some of that purchasing due to the pandemic, and now they're starting to see expect less of that going forward right now. The revised request includes 117 FTE, again, paid for with off-budget funds. This is an increase of 2 FTE from the FY 2022 revised request. And these 2 FTE would be within the agency's hosted services program to accommodate additional use in that service. On page 18, the governor did concur with the agency's off-budget request as well. On page 18, you'll find program and performance details. The agency does have 8 programs. Most of them are funded with off-budget expenditures. The section details the agency's programs, each function of that program, and its submitted performance measures. I can go into additional details on these if the chair would like. Otherwise, this would conclude my planned presentation. I can stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Questions from the committee. Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In this document, where does it show, and maybe you've changed direction a little bit, but where does it show the fees that you charge the agencies?
So the actual line-by-line fees are not in this document. We do have an overview in this document. I think it's page, let me take a look here real quick. I think it's page 16. Has a summary. Well, the page 16 and 17 actually show the changes from in 2022 and 2023. I actually have a table on a little earlier in the document. One moment here. On page 9, it'll show it at the very bottom. There's a projected revenue by line of service here, but it doesn't break out in the agency. The page 16 and 17 shows like the top 10 increases and top 10 decreases for FY 2022 and 2023. I can get you the individual like rate charged if you're interested in that as well.
The only concern that I had previously was, do the agencies have that as an expense? And you're coming back as income from that. You're showing that as revenue coming in, correct?
Yeah, that's why it's off budget. It's accounted for on that agency's budget, and this is just kind of, they're trying to recover the cost of offering that service.
Thank you.
Senator Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some similar questions, and mine may be for Secretary Burns Wallace, but I'll ask them, and she can get ready for my questions. And I had that same a few years ago. The agencies, not quite as many emails and calls as I got on labor issues, but there were several agencies concerned about the rate charges and so on. So my question is, it looks like we have an understandable and an acceptable charge structure now that the agencies realize and can afford. And as you said, that shows up in the off-budget part. So there's that question. And then my other question is about the Unisys data centers. Where are we in terms of, and I'm asking more than I understand, but where are we in terms of cloud services versus our own servers on that? And then my final question is going to be, what role does OITS play in the new Department of Labor computer system? Are they part of that, or is that a completely separate issue? And does any of that show in this budget? I don't think it does. So whoever should answer those. Oh, sorry. See, great minds are always on the same track, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
You would care to address any of those?
I will defer those last two to the agency on that. The first one, though, I can speak a little bit to that, and they'll probably want to speak a bit more to that. The last, I believe, 2 years or so, they've been working to collapse the rate structure from, I think it was all the way up until like over 100 down to 30, and I think they have plans to go down to maybe 15 now, or they may have already reached that at this point in time. So it's much more rolling together and make it like an all-in-one rate, as opposed to like individual line items for like very specific amounts of utilization that also comes with like just confusion by state agencies about what they need. So.
Further questions? If none, thank you very much. We'll call again upon the secretary. Madam?
Good morning again. I switch hats as the Executive Branch Chief Information Technology Officer. Thank you for hearing our budget. Couple of things that I just want to highlight quickly here. One, you can see that our budget is pretty consistent now. And that word, consistency, is actually what we've been striving for these last 3 years. Just a nod to some of the questions that have already come in. There were years where rates were going all over the place and budgets were going all over the place. And so what we've tried to do over the last 3 years is to get this budget where it is much more consistent, where the rates are much more understandable, tied to the clear lines of service that agencies are using, and that those rates are consistent across time. The chart that KLRD actually pulled from one of our earlier presentations on page 16 and 17 just even shows you how we did some of the rate changes, and across these last few years, we worked to we did 2 years where we kept them completely flat because we needed to do some internal work to make sure they were matching. And then they started to move a bit, but as they moved, we cleaned up the rates, we consolidated them. And once we cleaned them up, actually more than half of the agencies started seeing actually a savings in their actual rates, their full bucket of rates. Now, certain agencies have utilization that have gone up and different things. Our data center migration is complete. And so those that are in that Unisys third-party hosted system are using that at a different rate, but they were paying for on-prem services before. So sometimes in our budget, you can't really see that. It's not as if it's just a brand new cost. It is an updated system that they are paying for or space that they are in. They were paying for something else. And so sometimes it trades off in the background of the system. But we've worked very diligently to try to clean this up, make it more understandable from agencies. I hope that as you are going through this committee process, you haven't heard like years past where everyone's saying, my OIT's rates went up and I have no idea why. They know why because we have met with every cabinet and non-cabinet financial team to show them their rates 2 years in a row and to show them what's behind it.
Now, if you can inform Senator Hawk, then that'd be great. So, want to take your questions? Are they being answered or?
Mr. Chairman,
Take-
I am
you don't have
so
a lot of time.
excited about this. I'm going to have at least 15 or 20 minutes free time for the rest of my legislative career every day in terms of not hearing complaints from constituents. So thank you, Mr.
And to your question around the Unisys data center, it is a third-party hosted data center. It is not a cloud data center, and it is in Overland Park. And we have like a 2-pager that goes over that data center migration that is complete. We are completely out of Landon. We are flipping that space in Landon and getting ready to use it for office space. And we can provide that to the committee as well, just as a background on the data center and that work. Right. Your last question was around the modernized system that labor is going through. That system, as with all of our agencies, sits primarily with the agency. However, all of the systems then sit on our networks. So we have parts of our team that have been part of their team as they have put together their specs, as they have gone through their process. And once they are ready, approved, and their process starts, there will always be a part of our OITS team that is sitting as a part of their larger team. We do not have the lead, we're not the controlling team, but what we are there for is to make sure the decisions that they are making, the systems that they are pulling, actually can talk to accordingly our systems. Our KSO's office, our security office, has been there and has provided feedback and background to make sure as they're looking at security parameters around it, being able to provide feedback as they can and or to help identify other expertise. So we play more of an advisory role, but we are a part of those conversations, but we are not the lead in those. And we have been part of those as they have moved through building their specs, their RFP, and those things of that nature. So that's a little bit, I know there may be more questions in that space.
Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're about to lose the room, so I'll be brief. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the work that you've done with this agency. You have been given a number of challenges, shall we say, that you have navigated very well with you and your team. And also, going back to the House when I had this budget and all the way to here, how much time you have taken to walk us through the transition that this agency's gone through. I just really appreciate the time that you spent on that and the work your entire team has done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senators, anything else? Any other questions or information that you would like to have? Senator Hawk for the last time.
I'd like to join the remarks of the senator from Saline.
You'd like to spread them across the journal?
I'd like to spread them everywhere in the world. Thank you. And thank you, Madam Secretary, for the work of you and your team. I think it's
Yes,
been
ditto
incredible.
from all of us. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. All right, what's the flavor of the committee? Senator Hawk.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the budgets for the OITS budget for 22 and 23.
Got a second from Senator Alley. It's been moved and seconded to pass the budget out. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Nay, those opposed, nay. Motion passes. Budget's out. Thank you very much. Thank you. We are adjourned.